Hi everyone, this is Christine Brooks and I'm really excited to be with you today and to talk about feminism and transpersonal psychology and their relationship and also places where they haven't been in relationship. And I'm really excited and I was really thrilled to be asked to do this talk with you today from Jorge Ferrer. And when I was thinking about getting started on this, I realized, oh my God, how am I going to talk about feminism in 30 minutes when this is something I've been doing for about 27 years. So instead of using our time today to talk about the history of feminism, which we'll touch on a little bit, and to talk about the roots of feminism, I really want to spend this time to focus on why feminism matters in transpersonal and integral psychology, the utility of the frames of feminism and the importance of the frames of feminism to our disciplines, and also what collectively are we learning from feminism in transpersonal and integral psychology that we may have been missing in the early literature and in the early scholarship? So my goal here today is to get you as excited about this field and about how this field informs my work in transpersonal and integral psychology as I've become in the last 15 years of being part of our community. So with that in mind, I am going to go back to the roots of feminism, and I'd really like to start with Carol Hanish's very famous quote, "The personal is political." And for me, what that means is that stories matter, narratives matter, how we talk about ourselves and how we situate ourselves matters, and showing up with our whole self in our scholarship and in our research and in our writing really does matter. So with that in mind, I'd like to tell you a little bit about who I am and how I bring feminism into my own work, and use that as a leaping off point for talking about the types of research and writing and scholarship and theory and, working with people in the healing professions that feminism that we can support through understanding and practicing from a feminist perspective in a more effective way. I am a second generation academic. My father is also, he's a doctor of public health, and my mom has been an educator my whole life. And based upon my socioeconomic and geographic locations of origin, that's a pretty big deal. I am a child of the South. I'm a child of poverty. I'm biracial. I have more education than I ever anticipated I would be afforded to have. So I do have access in fairly significant ways. I am cisgendered. I am queer in orientation, but often the way that I present and the way that I'm perceived doesn't match the way that I live internally. So I also notice that locations of identity have visibility and invisibilities that I would have never understood if I hadn't been exposed to feminism and if I hadn't been exposed to queer theory really early in my life. Through that critical lens. So I also hold that that the personal is political is also about how do we show up in the work that we do? How do we show up as scholars, as educators, as authors, as researchers, as people, as activists, all of which can be interpreted and also lived through feminist frameworks. So I offer that not as an overshare, but I really offer that as a modeling of the fact that while feminism began as centering women, and I'll unpack that a little bit too as we go along, but really centering the female lived experience in a way that had not been done before in many circles of experience. Part of the modeling too of the personal as professional is to really situate the self within the scholarship and to situate the self in positionality in relationship to our work and also to our relation to others. So I offer that as a starting place for where my political is personal and my personal is political. I was educated right at the cusp of third wave feminism, so I was educated by second wave feminists, or the people that are often seen as the founders of contemporary feminism. So I was influenced by the works of, Gloria Steinem and Bella Abzug and Betty Friedan and all of the sort of mainstream, mainline feminists. I also was very much influenced by the work of Bell Hooks and the work of Patricia Hill Collins and the works of Rita Mae Brown, who often is seen as a literary figure but not really as a feminist figure, although she was one of the very early lesbian voices in feminism. So right from the beginning, recognizing that feminism is not an academic endeavor only, it is not an activist endeavor only, it is not only an artistic endeavor only, but it really is a place where these disciplines come together into a nexus of consideration of lived experience and of the centeredness of saying we must view and explore the lived experience of women, because that had been overlooked in so many of these disciplines in profound and oppressive ways for so long. So like I said, that second wave feminism was very much at the forefront of the time and place where I learned to understand and explore through these critical lenses. But I'm very much influenced by my third wave sisters and my third wave colleagues. In fact, the early writings of third wave feminists were being developed in the early 90s and mid 90s when I was leaving college and doing my early graduate work. And the questions that were being asked by third wave feminists were things like, what happens when we rely on the concept of essentialism in our critical analysis, in our artistic expression, in our authorship? And in this way, essentialism was really talking about there being biological definitions and imperatives of what we mean when we say the term mother, or what we mean when we say the term woman. The mother part is my own scholarship and my own dissertation work showing, because I was studying intentional childlessness. So unpacking this concept of mother being an essential notion of what it means to be a woman as well is a good example of what I mean when I say essentialism. So third wave feminists were saying, not so fast. How do we categorize this notion of what we mean when we say woman? And really brought in an intersectional voice into interrogating the very cisnormative ways that we were considering the female lived experience and the woman identified lived experience. So that's one contribution that I see that contemporary feminism has had. Early second wave feminism was also criticized for unacknowledged racism and unacknowledged heteronormativity and unacknowledged classism in ways that really created some conflict in the discipline. There were some early feminists who really felt strongly that by consideration of an intersectional view of identity would derail the project and the process of fighting for equality based upon the sole classification of a person as female, as woman. So third wave feminists and post-colonial feminists and many schools of thought that have come about since the mid-90s really ask us to ask the question, when we say feminism and when we use the terms like woman or female or feminine, whose definition are we using? Whose locations of political power are we using? How are we describing the lived experience? Are we silencing some voices while inviting others? This is certainly something that I've often asked of myself, and I continue to ask of myself in my own scholarship, and I don't always get it right. Many of us are struggling with asking the questions of how is feminism relevant and important and alive today? And many people are coming to the conclusion that it is alive today both by absolute necessity. There's a long way to go in terms of everything from pay equity to dismantling of rape culture to appropriate mental health paradigms related to female-identified lived experience, international resource allocation and justice movements are still very inequitable when it comes to gender and gender identification. So feminism is relevant, it is important, and yet there's a way in which taking this intersectional and also a post-colonial view is very important in order to expand the notion of how we are holding and framing feminist thought as we are continuing to explore what it means to support and what it means to live as embodied, self-identified females. So that's a big picture piece. I know I kind of went all over the place there, but it kind of almost gives a flavor of what it's like to continue to ask questions about being a feminist in this day and time, especially in the political and social climate that we live in here in the United States right now. And so I offer that as a humble beginning to our conversation to suggest that feminism is not one thing. It's not static. It's not monolithic. It is not formulaic in the sense that there's this operating definition of feminism that can be applied to all these disciplines. And it's also not a discipline in and of itself. It goes far beyond the academy. It goes well into activist and grassroots movements. It goes well into the personal lived experience of the people who self-identify as feminist. So it is a fractal, in a sense. There's many different components to this idea of what it means to work toward justice and equity and inclusion of women-identified voices throughout life. So I offer that as a complexification of this idea that we can actually even define the idea of feminism. And in the next section, we'll unpack a little bit about, well, why does this matter to transpersonal psychology and integral psychology?